There's the way the mind works, which is massive, huge, it's the basis. And then, of course, there's the way this law of karma works, because the law of karma plays out in minds and is the basis for determining what we think and do and say. So it's a bit like, we know there's a law called botany. We can look at outside and see this massive overgrown green stuff. And we know it's not random. We know there's a law called botany that amazing human beings have investigated, and we know it's a natural law, and it's the law that you learn if you want to govern what grows. So there's a really good analogy for karma. We don't think like this way in our ordinary world, but it's such a practical one. You know very well that if you want a beautiful garden necessarily in the future, because you can't just do it now, you've got to determine what seeds to plant. That means you've got to know botany, and the seed is the one that the choice for what you plant is based upon the fruit you want, isn't it? It's kind of obvious. Well, here, the Buddhist view of karma is this natural law that runs the universe, or the law in which the universe runs, if you like. It's not a thing running something. It's not like someone's doing it. Like botany, there's no one running botany. Botany runs itself. You get the point here. This is a really important point. Because if you think the Buddha's... Okay, this is a really important point. It's not just some interesting philosophical concept. It's got immense experiential implications. Because we're so used to the idea that there's a creator, let's say, who runs the universe and then judges and rewards. That's a really crucial point. This is a massive point. I was a Catholic, right? So necessarily I had faith in the boss. And I'm not being sarcastic, I'm just using words, ordinary words. And that means, I always quote this. I asked my Jesuit priest friend, please define a sin. By definition, what makes something sinful? And he said, by definition, it's doing what God said not to do. This is completely reasonable if God's the boss. Completely reasonable. But this is our default assumption about morality. Somehow you're doing something that someone says you shouldn't do. It's always like a feeling of it's being sort of pushed on top of you, some law or rule. And that's how we feel in the materialist world as well. In my mother's household, if mummy said don't do that, we know my question will be why not, and we know her answer will be the same as God, because I say so. So we really analyse, that's our view of a morality. God says don't do this, mummy, the police, the judge, the law, the people, the world in general has all these laws and they're pushing them down on top of us and we're supposed to obey them. That's how we feel. It's very dualistic for the Buddha. He says it's not like that. He says karma is a natural law. No one made it up. No one's running it. It runs itself like botany or gravity. It's a really powerful point, actually. So because Buddha's not a creator, he doesn't assert a creator. He says we don't need creating because there's the law of karma. It's a natural law that runs minds, that runs lives, that is the way of describing why there is happiness, why there is suffering. This is for the Buddha. So it's quite a powerful point, actually, and it's very articulate and goes very deep and very clear in the way this law is presented. So if you want to have a beautiful garden in 20 years' time, you know perfectly well you better learn botany. And that determines everything you do now is based upon the fruit you want in the future. It's completely logical. If you want money in the future, you have to save money now. If you want a house in the future, you have to build a house now. We all know that you do something now that determines what you'll have in the future. It's a very reasonable concept. And we see this is how life works. Well, Buddha says the same about karma. That the happiness we have now is the fruit of actions we have done in the past. Action means karma. And that whatever suffering we've got is the fruit of actions we've done in the past. We have done. We're our own creators, as the Dalai Lama says. And this concept is not how we think. It doesn't just mean what you do now brings the results now. What you do now brings future results, like that seed will bring future trees. You'll be very disappointed if you think you put an acorn in the ground today, tomorrow you don't get an oak tree. You'll be a bit depressed if you think it should come immediately. Ridiculous. So the Buddhist view of karma is, we've got this consciousness, these rivers of mental moments, if you like. They're very personal, they're our mind. And that whatever's in it, whatever tendencies are there, whatever experiences we have, whoever we meet, however they treat us, all this is due to this law of karma. For the Buddha, it's a natural law. He didn't make it up. He's not a creator of it. He's not running it. He's not a punisher or a rewarder. In Buddhism, there's no concept like punishment and reward because that implies a rewarder and a punisher. There's no concept like that. That's instinctively how we feel. So it takes a while to hear this, you know. So basically, as Buddha's saying, whatever experiences we have now in general, think of your life as like your garden. Whatever's in your garden, the weeds, the flowers, the herbs, the good things, the chaos, the clarity, whatever's there, this is the fruit mainly of actions you have done in the past. You've passed your own past programming. Because Buddha's saying every millisecond of what we think and do and say, every millisecond of what we think and do and say, just naturally sows seeds in our mind. They use that analogy. That will necessarily ripen in the future as who we are, our experiences, our tendencies, what happens to us. It's dealt with in immense depth in all the literature. That's why just to say, oh, I believe in karma, is like saying I believe in botany. Oh, how does it work? Oh, I don't know. What good is that? What good is that? Useless. I'm happy you believe in it, but it doesn't help you. So you've got to understand it. And again, like I'm saying, and we don't think this, but it's dealt with in immense depth in the literature. And these Indians saw it centuries before Buddha, you know. Okay, there's various interpretations of it, obviously. So the understanding karma and understanding the mind, these are the nuts and bolts of being a Buddhist, actually. If you choose to, no one's forcing you. And equally, no one's forcing you to even do this. I mean, you can be a 1% Buddhist. You can do what you like with Buddhism. You can take a piece of it and use it. No one says you can't. But we're talking here the 100% one, you know. The bigger picture. So one basis here, like I said before, we could take happiness and suffering as our basis. So the Buddha would say, if you observe all sentient beings, dogs and ants and rats and humans, all sentient beings want happiness. All sentient beings do not want suffering. He says almost you can take this as a starting point, you know. So logically then, for yourself, you've got to start with yourself. What is happiness and what is suffering? And then, what are the causes? Because once you know the causes of something, you get the result. It's pretty straightforward. So to understand this, you know, apparently the first teaching the Buddha gave, after he got put all this together for himself, you know, was in this place called, you know, in Varanasi, in India, out near Varanasi. That was the first kind of, you know, talk he gave about this, and it's framed in terms of these, it's called the Four Noble Truths. But actually it's a bit of a misnomer, because the truths aren't noble. It's really the four truths, or I like the word facts. Truth sounds a bit religious, you know. The four facts. I like that. For the noble ones. The truths aren't noble. It's the people who've understood it. They're called noble ones. You know, all these holy terms they use. A person who's realised all this. So it's framed in terms of suffering. Because clearly, you know, you see, the method for getting happiness is to get rid of suffering for the Buddha. So you've got to focus on the suffering. You put another way, the wisdom wing is getting rid of all the weeds. And the compassion wing is growing all the flowers. So you can't grow flowers until you've got a few weeds out, isn't it? So you've got to know what the weeds are. Suffering, speaking simply. So the first of these four is that there is suffering, and he presented in 3 levels. The second is there are causes. The third is you can be free of it. This whole, you know, this is the fundamental starting point, actually, starting point. And the fourth one is how to do it. It's very simple. So then if it's true, instinctively, we observe others and certainly see ourselves, we don't want suffering. We better understand what it is, you know. There's different levels of it. And the first one is the really obvious one. They even call it the suffering of suffering. It's when the bad things happen. Everyone understands that. It's completely natural. So again, if we look into our lives, you know, we know that we can't stand bad things happening. We don't question even why we can't. And that's where Buddha deals with at a deeper level when he goes to the second type of suffering, which is dealing with all these delusions in the mind. These are the source. But the very first one is kind of obvious, you know, when the bad things happen. Someone punches you in the nose, you get cancer, your knee hurts, the house falls down, the husband leaves you, whatever. Or even just the red lights. There's levels of suffering, aren't there, you know? And essentially, if we understand, according to the second noble truth is the causes. So like we just said before, the Buddha's saying the main cause of everything, but here specifically, the main cause of bad things happening is in the mind. There's two causes for Buddha, two main causes. So if I'm suffering, and you'll say, why? Then I'll say, Panos punched me. So naturally, we assume there is one cause of my suffering, and it's called Panos. Why are you happy, Robina? Oh, Neil was so kind to me. There's one cause of our happiness, it's called Neil. So in general, I think that assumption is pretty deep inside us, like I said in the beginning. There's an assumption, it feels like that. Just as Neil said, you walk into a room full of happy people, naturally you feel that that vibe of happiness is why you're happy. You walk into the room of unhappy people, you assume that vibe is the source of why you're unhappy. As he said, it's a really good point. We accept that, we assume that, we feel that. So we kind of think we're a victim of those circumstances, including the good ones. Which is why we have attachment, which is like this vampire that wants to make sure it only gets the good ones. Because we assume the good external circumstances, the kind words, the kindness, the money in the bank, the food, the healthy body, the external things, we just assume they are the source of my pleasant feelings. So Buddha doesn't disagree. Eating cake does trigger a pleasant feeling. Somebody smiling at you does trigger a pleasant feeling. He's not arguing with that, it's true. But he says, we've got to go deeper. Because that one is, just as Neil said, you can't help it. That's because we don't understand there's this junkie in there, attachment, that's manipulating and craving frantically to only get the nice things. And when it doesn't, then anger will arise, aversion will arise, have a panic attack and freak out. So we don't look into that level of it. So that a surface level, it's true. Panos' punch is the cause of my suffering. His kindness is the cause of my happiness. But he says, Buddha says, we've got to go deeper. That's the point here. So, for the Buddha, there are two main causes of that suffering moment I just experienced. And shockingly, neither of those causes is Panos' punch, which is a bit shocking to us. Buddha says they're both in me. The main causes are in me. So as soon as we hear this, we want to kill ourselves because we think we're a bad person, we get guilty. But there's no concept like that in Buddhism. But it's hard to hear it because it's our default mode. We run to blame and guilt and shame and that kind of thing, you know. But that's just part of ego, Buddha says, and it takes time to go beyond it. But it's a technical point. The Buddha says, given that every single thing we think and we experience now, which is the garden now, whatever's in our garden now, whatever's in our life now, including what's in our mind and out there, whatever's in our life now is necessarily, like that garden, the fruit of things you planted earlier. That's what Buddha's saying. And he's talking about previous lives. So logically, if you call something suffering, we'll call that a weed. It's something you don't want. And there's causes, you know, of doing something like that. So if we look at the two main causes of this moment of suffering, then yes, Panos' punch does play a role. Buddha doesn't argue. But he says there is a cause for even why Panos punched me in the first place. And it's nothing to do with now. The main cause is a past event, similar in my consciousness, a seed I planted in the past by doing something similar to him, speaking very simplistically. And second, karma is pretty personal. You see, again, if karma is a natural law, this is hard to hear it, it's so shocking to us, because we just assume everything's random. We assume, oh, well, no one knows why bad things happen. No one knows why good things happen either. We don't ever ask that question. We don't care. Just give me more good. I don't care what the causes are. We never ask why. I said before, there's one question only once I've ever had. Well, there's one question I've never had. Robina, why do good things happen? We don't care why good. We just give me more, please. Like, really, you know. But bad things, as soon as a bad thing happens, we go mad. Why do bad things happen? It is a very interesting point, isn't it? Well, it's the same law of karma applies, you know. It's like saying, how dare there be weeds in my garden? I don't deserve it, we'll say. Well, it's your garden, honey. Of course you planted them. That's why the garden's a good analogy. So if karma's a natural law, which he's saying it is, then things can't be random. This is shocking to us. And it's reasonable, because if God created you, you began in your mother's womb. And if your mummy created you, you began in your mother's womb. In each case, you began in your mother's womb. There's no you from before there, is there? Well, Buddha says there is. You go way back, baby. And every single thing we think and do and say puts seeds in the ground, puts seeds in our mind that ripen as our future experiences. So by definition, an unpleasant experience is the fruit of a past negative action. By definition, a pleasant experience is due to a past action of mine. So we're the boss, Buddha says. Easy words to say, intensely hard to get to, because the instinct for us is the opposite. I'm an innocent victim. I didn't ask to get born. I mean, you have noticed that your mother and father didn't consult you before they made you? Sounds hilarious, I know, but it's true. You know, then they two idiots make another idiot, then they go and blame you for it. You go to your therapist, and she says, you know, then she says you got to go, and the therapist tells you you got to stop blaming your parents. Well, I disagree. If they really did make you, you should blame them, and you should sue them to the hilt. I'm sick. This is logical. If they did make you, Buddha says they didn't. Okay. So, you know, the two main causes of this present moment of suffering are, one, a past action or karma. The word karma means action. But really the main one here is intention, the mind. So the second cause is an action done with my body, speaking simply, an action done by my body informed by the second cause, the main one, a negative state of mind, a delusion. These two together produces a future moment of suffering. It's similar for happiness. Simply speaking, the nuts and bolts of it, you know. This is dealt with in great depth in the literature, highly technical. But just, like I said, not just some hippie idea, you know. Because for the Buddha, this is what you have to practice yourself. You don't just believe that it's true, you have to learn it, like botany, learn the techniques of it. So that's what you apply in your daily life to determine what thought and action you do now, because that will sow a seed that will produce your future. It's pretty reasonable. You have to know those plants. You have to know those seeds you're going to plant. Otherwise, you're going to get, you know, weeds instead of oak trees. Same here. So the two main causes of my suffering, my past action and the delusion that impelled it. And then because I let that seed in, it's manifested now as this moment of suffering. So yes, of course, Panos plays a role, but he's only a secondary cause. He's like a catalyst. That's a really good point. That's the main point. And this is where it's such a shift, because we assume he's the main cause. And in fact, we don't even think we play a role in it at all. That's what's so shocking. And the same with happiness. We're the boss. These words are so simple, but they take so long to internalize, because we've got the opposite view. That's why it's difficult. These words aren't complicated, just that it's so shocking to us, because it's not how we think, you know. So what's the implication of this? This is the point. The implication is I'm in charge. The implication is stopping to be a victim, getting less angry, less neurotic. That's the implication of really taking this on board seriously, that I'm in charge. Not in an obsessive way, in a good, intelligent way, instead of being the victim. It's opposite to victim. Always finding reasons why this and why that is not my fault. It's deep instinctive ego to say it's not my fault, which means it means not taking responsibility. So that if I'm using this as my, let's say in my relationship with Panos, let's say I'm using karma, I've chosen to use Buddha's views to interpret my life. That's really what practice is in day-to-day life. Day-to-day life is, if again, like that's why I like the garden analogy. If you're a gardener and you look at your garden, you're not just looking and going, oh, aren't they lovely? You're looking and analysing, aren't you, right there, the fruits of what you just planted. You're looking at how you could make it better, how you could harness this one, how you could pull out that weed. You're seeing your garden through the lens of botany. It's a really good point. If you don't know botany, you just look at your garden and think, oh, isn't this lovely, or isn't that lucky, or isn't that unlucky, or how dare there be weeds there, or who put the flowers there? You have no way of interpreting your garden, therefore no way to really know how to grow your garden. You just look at it and hope it turns out nice. Here, karma is informing the way you interpret your life, which means, you know, instead of the victim's response, not fair, poor me, it's not my fault, you're interpreting what this is the fruit of my past action, so what can I do about it? It's much more proactive. really and truly. And that won't come until you understand the nuts and bolts of how karma works. So what are these nuts and bolts? It's pretty basic, but it's kind of profound, you know. If you choose, you don't have to. I've chosen, that's all. So I'm using, you know, I've chosen to take, I like to say it this way, I never just say I believe in karma. I say I'm using Buddhist views about the universe as my working hypothesis, and I mean that very sincerely. So, okay. Well, they say there are four main ways in which our past actions ripen in the present. And again, we're using the framework of happiness and suffering, because pretty much in our daily life we can see this is how we feel, isn't it? When bad things happen, we call it suffering, we want to avoid it. When good things happen, we call it happiness, we want to get more of it. And then there are other experiences we can call neither happy nor suffering. Well, you know, forget them for the moment, who cares? So it's a pretty fundamental one that the whole universe runs by, isn't it? Happiness and suffering. It's pretty basic. So if we want to analyse our present life, we can divide all of it into these four tracks of karma, if you like, four ways of interpreting our present life in terms of actions we have done in the past that have caused this. And for the Buddha, this applies to all sentient beings, all animals, all dogs, all ants, and all other beings that we can't even see. Trillions and trillions, Buddha says. So the first way our past actions have ripened in the present is in terms of our very humanity. And that implies Buddha's view that there are many choices of types of rebirth, not just humans. The term sentient being in English, I think that the Tibetan word for it is really delicious. It's sem chen, and it means mind possessor. So for the Buddha, there are trillions of mind possessors. Trillions, countless. There's not an atom of space that is not pervaded by mind possessors. All shapes and sizes and tiny creatures in our body. You know, there are beings that aren't physical. There's humans, animals, all these trillions and trillions, Buddha says. All of them experiencing the fruits of their past actions, necessarily. It's just like natural. Whatever's growing in a garden is there because of the seeds you planted. It's just necessarily. It's just the way it is. It's a natural law. Buddha says this. So the first way our past actions have ripened is in terms of our getting a human body. Well, for the Buddha, it's like we won the lottery. Getting a human mind. The real point is the human mind. And the characteristic of a human mind, even if we can have access to some of it, is we've got access to our virtue, to our kindness, our intelligence, our capacity to see things from a different point of view, our capacity to put two and two together, intelligence, understanding how things are interdependent, our joy, our kindness, our love, our compassion, our generosity. These are the virtuous qualities. And the Buddha would say these are our saving grace. These are the qualities that make us human. And this is not just some accident. It's due to the habit of practicing these that we've got what's called a human body, as opposed to the dog's body in the backyard. You see, Buddhist psychology refers to all sentient beings, not just to humans, which is kind of interesting. So we look at animals, not being critical, we say leopards can't change their spots. So one of the key functions of an animal's mind in general is that they've mainly got access to the negative states, to the ego-based ones, attachment and fear and anger and paranoia and jealousy and all that stuff. And then that's what informs their actions, because what's in your mind informs your actions of body and speech. So we can see humans have got access to our virtue, but look how hard it is. When things go wrong, it's really hard to be forgiving and loving and intelligent and unfearful and jealous. We know that. Even the smallest negative external event, like Neil said, to unhappy people. We just assume there's no choice. I just have to launch into fear and paranoia as well and be unhappy. Buddha says, no, we can learn to control it. So getting a human body, there's a book I read, I edit books, one of my jobs, I edit books, and one I just finished a couple of years ago that's now published, and it's also available to download for free if you want. I can tell you what it is. It's a book about how to help at the time of death. by Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And it's huge, it's incredibly, really helpful for my mind to work on this, because the way they describe in great detail the death process, it's described especially in the Buddhist esoteric teachings, in the Vajrayana or the Tantra teachings, there's detailed descriptions of the way we die and get born. And so one of the long-term job of great meditators, any of us, if we want to learn, is to go through this process with control so you can determine your next rebirth without confusion, because Buddha says everybody will take another rebirth again and again and again. We must be in control. We need to be in control of the process. So they say that not many weeks before our consciousness went to our mother's fallopian tube or whatever it was and joined the sperm of our daddy, not more than a few weeks, our mind was in a previous body. And then that we must have died fairly peacefully. This is why Lama Zopa says this whole thing of helping people at the time of death is so crucial, because death is really fearful for most people because of this massive attachment. And so death is really painful for most people. So we'll discuss this later. So it's not more than a few weeks before our conception in our mummy's womb that our consciousness, the Buddha would say, and again it's dealt with in great depth in the literature, was in a previous body. And we can assume we died peacefully, relatively peacefully, and then it was triggered. We'll go into the process more lately. A virtuous karmic seed was triggered. Because basically one of the points that Buddha makes is there's not a millisecond of anything we ever think or do or say that goes astray. I like to say we're storing all the seeds from everything we think and do and say like these different bank vaults. Clearly Buddha doesn't describe bank vaults. It's just my analogy. There's not a millisecond of what we thought and done and said that disappears. It goes into it leaves seeds, tendencies, or it programs our consciousness. This is a huge point to comprehend. And again, it's dealt with in all the literature, how this happens. Nothing goes astray. Everything gets stored there. So we can deduce from the Buddhist perspective that a very powerful virtuous karmic seed of the practice of morality, of goodness, probably practice, as Lama Zopa says, in the context of a spiritual path, and certainly practice in the context of keeping our vows, our word of honour, our vows of spiritual practice. We'll discuss all this too. One of these seeds was triggered before we stopped breathing, and literally from that moment programmed us to go to our present mummy's human womb a few weeks later. So in this sense, literally, you bring your own stuff with you. Your mother and daddy provide you with a body, but that's it. You provide yourself with your own mind. It's such a shocking concept, because either the Christian one, the Jewish one, or the materialists all say the same thing. Somebody else made you, someone else gave you what you are, not for the Buddha. It's the fruit of our own past. So to get a human body is pretty amazing. I remember reading in one book, this sounds hilarious, one Tibetan Lama said that at the time of a male and female human having sex, billions of consciousnesses that have recently passed away, and if you think about it, it can't be all human ones because there aren't that many, billions from all the other realms as well, are all hovering around trying to get in. It's hilarious. I think it's hilarious. I mean, that's hilarious. And this might sound like science fiction to some people, but what can I tell you? This is Buddha's teaching. It's been around for several thousand years, okay? Just that we haven't read it, that's all. I'm not making it up, I promise. So anyway, that was very fascinating, I thought. So we got in. We got in, okay? So we kind of won the lottery. But the Buddha would say it's not just good luck, it's the fruit of your own incredible practice of virtue in the context of keeping vows of virtue. And I'll describe these. Being good is not enough, Lama Zopa. Just being a nice person is not enough. You've got to practice in this very powerful context of intention. We'll go into it later. Okay, so we got this human body. That's the first way that our past actions have ripened. We got the human body. That's the first bank vault. The second one, now we look into all the humans on this earth. And we can see them all different personalities, haven't they? You've got your Hitlers and your Mother Teresas and everything in between, right? Isn't it? Do you understand? So this is not, the main cause of these tendencies are our own past actions. The habit to do something, the habit to lie or kill or be psychotic or to play music or piano or football, it has come from your habit of having done it before. It's sort of the idea is hardly rocket science. And we can see this when you look at lots of little kids. You look on YouTube these days and these little 3-year-olds playing Bach. I mean, you just can't believe your eyes. You think it's a lie. It's not possible. These baby little three-year-old fingers playing this complicated Bach music. You know that it didn't come out of the sky like that. So the best we go is, oh, well, you know, who knows why. Well, honey, she must have done it before. She's so familiar. She's 3 years old and off she goes riding, playing bark again.